Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmery. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the Relevant Radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
It's a feast day of St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, also known as St. Edith Stein. She died in Auschwitz during World War II, and we're going to unpack a little bit of her story, but in particular her writings later today during the show. She was a philosopher, a phenomenologist. She went from being Jewish to agnostic to Catholic to becoming a religious sister, a nun in the Catholic faith, and then dying again at Auschwitz during World War II. And her writings are so poignant in this century as well as in the last century, as she wrote tremendously on the topic of women, in particular diving into what does it mean to be a woman? How can we look at this philosophically? And how can we dive into the theology of maleness and femaleness? And so we'll unpack a little bit of what it means to be a woman, as well as differences between man and woman in our vocation. Her writing is beautiful. You'll not be bored by this saint and even some of the controversial things that she has to say about who we are as women and men. You're listening to Trending with Timmery here on Relevant Radio. Joining me now is Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He has been known in the past as a top law enforcement trainer here in the United States. His writings are required reading for the military. He has written a number of books, including the book Assassination Generation, that talks about the impact of video games, media, violent television, and the connection to aggression and the psychology of killing and the connection in our society. Today we're going to talk about why there's been an increase in aggression and bad behavior among children, and we'll talk about the psychological impact, tying that into video games, TVs, and screens. But we'll also talk about solutions, not just the problem, but what we can do about it to have better behaved children who are happier and performing better academically. I think this is what most people want, for their kids to be happy, perform well academically, and to be well behaved. Well, what's getting in the way of that? We're going to touch at the heart of this today with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. I highly recommend his book, Assassination Generation. We'll post a link now on social media. Just follow me at Timmery, that's Timmerie, for more information on my guest as well as his book. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, welcome back to Trending.
Hello, Timmery. Always good to be on board with you and your wonderful listeners out there. And this is such an important topic.
Let's talk a little bit about it, because you have researched heavily into the aggression going on in society today. You've been one of the top responders when it's come to the issue of mass shootings, especially in our schools. But not everyone's necessarily dealing with a mass shooting in their school, but they may be dealing with bad behavior with their children, whether it be a teenage boy who's been aggressive or checked out, a young 8-9-year-old boy who is having tantrums over many things, including technology. There are a lot of things that could be discussed, but can you touch on what you've seen in your research that's at the heart of the psychology of the crisis of aggression and bad behavior in kids today?
You know, Timmery, it's really important to note that Hollywood television, movies, operated by a code all the way through the 30s and 40s, 50s, right into the very early 60s. And the code was very straightforward. It said, we understand the stories we tell have an impact on our society. Now think about that. They knew they were having an impact. And they said, we understand we have a responsibility to tell stories that will have a positive impact. And a lot of the code could be said in 3 words: crime doesn't pay. Criminals will not be depicted in a positive manner. Law enforcement will not be depicted in a negative manner. And they knew that they were having this influence, and they knew they had a responsibility to have a positive influence. And then in the early 1960s, they threw the code away, and they say, we refuse to accept any responsibility for the stories we tell. Now, a 30-second commercial is worth vast amounts of money. A 30-second commercial will have millions of children begging their parents for a brand of cereal. But the hours and days and weeks and months and years of garbage in between has no impact on your child. That's their lie. And this is the big lie, and it's so profound that the commercials are worth vast amounts of money. We know how they impact our children. We know they beg for toys and they beg for cereal, and yet all of this stuff in between the commercials has no impact. And this is this sinful, evil world that we turn our children over to. And it's an inside out world in which good is bad and bad is good. And kind of to begin at the, we can go all the way back, but just the video games are so addictive. We're biologically primed to seek survival data, and violence is survival data. But when you're actively engaging in violence, the child's body treats it like it's real. They go into fight or flight mode. And then when you turn it off, they're going through withdrawal symptoms. So fight or flight hormones are flushing out of their brains. It takes about 2 days to fully detox from violent media, violent television, violent movies, violent video games in particular. You've got this hormonal adjustment in your body to a fight or flight environment. When that happens, logical, rational, predictive left brain processing is shut down. When you're desperately fighting for your life, where your meal comes from tomorrow isn't even on your radar screen. So you ask the kid, you said, don't you understand? If you don't do your homework, you're going to get in trouble. No, he doesn't understand. Left brain processing is shut down. He's in fight or flight survival mode. And it takes about 2 days for those fight or flight hormones to flush out. Church camps nationwide tell me nothing spiritual happens in this camp for the first 2 days. They're going through withdrawal symptoms. They're miserable. On the 3rd day, it's like somebody threw a switch. Suddenly they're different children. All your listeners out there, your children will bless you for the television they didn't watch, the video game they didn't play. No adult has ever said, I cursed my parents for the television I couldn't watch. No adult has ever said, I cursed my parents for video games I couldn't play. They would say, I bless my parents because they'd kick me out the door and made me get a life. Maybe, when the streetlights came on is when we came back inside. And you don't understand how intensely, systematically addictive the cell phones and the video games and the TV shows have become. And this violence is tapping into a biological need. And so they can't turn it off. They've got to watch it. They've got to interact with it. They've got to become part of it. Adults are being destroyed by these games. Children are being eaten alive. And we've just got to turn around. And as you said, there are solution strategies. In the book, Assassination Generation, we got the website, takethechallengenow.org. And it's a TV turnoff curriculum, an entire school district, K through 12 school district, upstate Michigan, put the curriculum in place and cut violence in half, cut bullying in half, and raise test scores double digits.
Wow, that's incredible. And I want to dive more into the Take the Challenge Now in a little bit. But coming back to something you said, you mentioned that we're wired to seek out survivor data, that violent kind of content of what's happening. Can you explain a little bit more of this?
Well, it is human beings. We were not placed on this earth with claws or fangs. Our survival tool is our brain. And our great advantage is that we can learn from other people's experience. So when people are engaged in violent behavior, as long as you're not immediately personally threatened, your survival demands that you watch. What's the one thing on a highway other than a cop guaranteed to slow everybody down? A wreck, we've got to watch it. The worse the wreck, the more we're drawn to it. On the playground, the one thing that draws every kid like a magnet is a fight. They'll fight to see a fight. So this violence, what has happened is in a healthy environment, you might not see violent behavior, once in a year. Some fist fight might be the worst you ever see in a normal, healthy life. But now the media has fed us a steady stream of this stuff because it is the addictive ingredient. And your children become sullen and surly. They're being fed negative role models. They're being taught to take pleasure from human death and suffering. And it feeds a bullying behavior. In healthy play, kittens and puppies wrestle. When one of the puppies gets hurt, mama comes, checks up on it. As soon as somebody's hurt, the play stops. We all played toy guns, bang, bang, I gotcha. No, you didn't. You smack with your cap gun, it leaves a mark and he cries. Everybody gather around the hurt kid and try to convince him not to tell mom. In healthy play, whenever somebody gets hurt, the play stops. A basketball game, a football game, one of the players get hurt, the fans go silent, the play stops. In the video games, you inflict vivid depictions of suffering on your playmates. They beg for mercy, they bleed, and they writhe in pain, and you get points. This is pathological play, dysfunctional play that's teaching and rewarding bullying behavior to our children. And then when you turn these games off, they go through withdrawal symptoms, and you say, look at you. And it's so important to say, look what you're doing right now. This is the video game. This is not you. We turn that thing off, and look how you're acting right now. It's so important to make them aware. And then we give the games back. They get sullen and surly. We take them away. They improve. After a couple of rides on the roller coaster, they say, keep those games away from me. I don't like who I am when I play those games. And we've heard that over and over again. Keep those games away from me. I don't like who I am when I play those games. But they'll never know there could be another person, that there's another them, if you never turn it off and take them away from that and detox them from that. So it's so important for parents to protect their children from violent visual imagery, and then to go ahead and detox them. Now, the other great need is fed.
And I just want to speak briefly because I want to come to that need, but I like what you said here, that when the kids recognize what it's like to not use the video games and to know themselves not using them, they often like it. And I even think, I didn't grow up with video games. We very briefly had computer games in our house, and I knew what it was like to not use computer games and what I was like when I wasn't playing video games. And I knew what it was like when I did play computer games. And it was a very ugly, mean, grumpy, angry version of myself. And I saw the same thing happen with my brother. We didn't have video games in our house. In the brief stints where we had maybe a computer game, we knew and saw the difference, and were part of, along with my parents, that self-regulation of saying, it's not really something I want to do because it doesn't produce any happiness or good behavior. But the problem is that people don't know the difference, and that's why these detoxes are so important. I want to come back to that in just a little bit, but you said another really important thing that you wanted to mention was what?
Also, we're social animals, and we deeply crave, we need biological, we need group acceptance. And so that's fed with the cell phone. When people are liking, when you're on social media, when people are liking what you do, you get an endorphin rush. So we know teenage girls are desperately, desperately in need of affirmation, and group dynamics and mean girl dynamics comes into play. We don't realize how these cell phones are feeding that. The industry is feeding off this biological need for reassurance. In nature, one human being by themselves in the jungle is cat food. A group of human beings with spears is the alpha predator anywhere on the planet. So we have this biological need to be part of a group, and to be rejected from the group is one of the most horrendous things that could occur to anyone, because to be rejected from the group in nature is death. That I'm on my own trying to survive in the wilderness. So this need for acceptance is being fed with this social media and with the cell phones. So these biological needs for survival data, this biological need for social acceptance, is being manipulated to make these cell phones so addictive. Another resource you and I both have talked about before is takethechallengenow.com. Screenstrong.com. Melanie Hemp and screenstrong.com. Screen, SCREENSTRONG.com. And screenstrong.com is really good about talking about these cell phones are so addictive and how we need a detox, how the social media can be addictive, how the video games are addictive. But these these God-given biological dynamics of a need for to be part of a group, this God-given biological dynamic for to be wary of danger in our environment is being manipulated against us to make these addictive substances, the video games, the cell phones, the social media being fed to our children. And then we add the ingredient of sleep deprivation, because part of that whole package is this sleep deprivation. Even when you turn it off and send them to bed, the fight or flight hormones are flushing through their bodies, and they're not getting good quality sleep. But most often, they're up all night on their cell phone, text messaging, and sleep deprivation is a key factor in suicide and traffic deaths, two major killers of our kids that have exploded in recent years. You know, Facebook will never say you've been online for 36 hours, you need to get some sleep now. They'll never do that. They'll let you, they want you to do it until you die. The video game will never say you've been playing this game for 48 hours now, you need to get some sleep. They'll never say that. My little nephew committed suicide for years. We said, why? There's no note, there's no trauma. Well, he locked himself in his bedroom and played the new video game for 4 days straight. And when we looked at the sleep deprivation, when we said, was he sleep deprived? Boom! It just staring in our face that he'd no trauma in his life, no note, but he locked himself in the room, and after 4 days of playing video games and sleep deprivation in the game, he kills himself. So this is the link between sleep deprivation and traffic deaths exploded around the world, suicides exploded around the world at every age group. This is the kind of thing that it all joins in with this pathological dynamic. And the head of Netflix said that their number one competitor was not other online providers. Their number one competitor was sleep. The corporate policy of Netflix is to steal your sleep. They'll never say you've been binge watching the show for 36 hours, so you need to go to sleep now. They'll never say you've been on social media for 48 hours, you need to go to sleep. They'll never say that. They will, and they're feeding this to our children. It's not like they're doing this to adults. We say in my book about how they fought all the way to the Supreme Court to sell any game to any kid at any age. They're feeding off of children, and that's the great horror of what's happening out there.
And many people say, these are scare tactics. My kids using video games to socialize, especially with the social dimension of video games today, as well as social media. People or parents don't want their children to be isolated or themselves to be isolated. And yet the data is clear. And I love Melanie Hempy at ScreenStrong.com, who you mention very often, because she talks about the research. We have, Dr. Nicholas Carderas, Melanie Hempy, yourself, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, and others, Dr. Leonard Sachs, who all point to the data that's very clear that even the idea of 30 minutes a day on screen time for fun time is actually harmful, that it needs to be under that and doesn't have to be that 25 or 30 minutes. And what you're talking about points to the crisis in the culture, from the sleep deprivation, the aggression, the drug use to help treat the sleep deprivation from the chronic pain, which I know you often speak very commonly of. But one thing, I can't remember, was it you, Lieutenant Colonel, who had actually been called in by the military for a high number of infant deaths due to the fact that the parents, the fathers, when they were home with the children, were neglecting the children, and the babies were dying because these fathers were playing their video games for long periods of time.
No, that wasn't me called into the military. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah,
I could see them doing that.
Yeah.
I was contacted by a detective, a child crime detective, and she was, she came up to me during one of my presentations, and she was in tears. She said, in the last 6 months, I've had 5 cases where fathers and boyfriends have murdered babies because they were screaming babies, interrupting their video games.
Yes.
In one case, the boyfriend said that he dropped the baby, and the mother bought it until they showed her where they peeled back the poor little the dead baby's scalp and the imprint in the skull of the base of a video game player that had been slammed into the baby's skull and caved in the baby's skull. And she was just in tears at how many times she keeps running into the same thing across. This is in the central Illinois region. How many times these boyfriends, these these young fathers, the video games have been interrupted. They're in fight or flight mode. The hormones are flooding
Hmm.
through their body, the crying baby, even for somebody healthy.
Right.
A crying baby is a tremendous stressor. When
Right.
we add the sleep deprivation and the violence enabling dynamics going on with these video games, the combination is tragic. And I could see
Hmm.
the military
Right.
calling someone in to help with that. I was
Right.
not aware of it, and I certainly think that was worthy to have had on your show, and it wasn't me.
Right. I believe it was Dr. Nicholas Cardaris. She shared this recently on the show with us that, the military's trying to keep it quiet. They have a very, very high number of, again, just like you said, and not just in the military, but in the secular world as well, where these infants are dying because the fight or flight hormones going, the
Right.
baby screaming, it's a disruption. And this is how serious it is. And this is where we're talking about a problem in childhood that seemingly is coming out as aggression, not performing necessarily as well as they could perform. But I want to come back talking about the solutions, about good stories of what happens when you transition, what happens when you limit or eliminate video games potentially. So we'll be back with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He's been known as the top law enforcement trainer in the United States. In the past, his writing has been required reading for the military. You can check out his book, Assassination Generation, explaining the link between aggression and the psychology of killing, especially in high schools today. I'll be right back with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman here on Trending with Timmery.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, known as St. Edith Stein, died during World War II in Auschwitz. She has an incredible story. She was a phenomenologist, a philosopher. She went from Judaism to Gnosticism to Catholicism and becoming a religious sister. Today's her feast day. We're going to dive into her writings and her life to talk about what does it mean to be a woman and what are the differences between men and women. Joining me now is Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He has been known as the top law enforcement trainer in the United States. His writing is required writing for the military, diving into the topic of the psychology of killing. He's been a psychology professor at West Point. His book that is at the heart of so much of what we're talking about today is Assassination Generation. It's a very important book, especially if you're a parent or someone working with children, understanding what's behind the aggression or even the mass shootings. We all might not experience mass shootings in schools, but we do see a lot of aggression in children and suicidality. And we want to see a happier place for kids. And so to talk about how to change the tide, we've discussed the role that video games and social media and screen time and violent television has had on kids and how it's led to much of the crisis in our culture. But I want to talk about the solution. In your book, Lieutenant Colonel, Assassination Generation, you have a whole chapter focused on the solutions, how to find happier, better performing children academically, better behaved children. What are some of those solutions to change the tide of what's happening today?
Well, I think the beginning is to explain to the kids the problem and explain to the parents right up front. One thing here all the time, I played all those games. I'm not a killer. And what I tell people is, and this is really lays a foundation with, I tell people when I was a kid, I never buckled my seatbelt and I'm just fine. Every single kid I know, as we were growing up in the 60s, nobody buckled their seatbelt. We were all just fine. I don't know a single kid that died because his seatbelt wasn't buckled. But now I'm a cop and I'm a police trainer, and you don't have to scrape too many kids off the highway before you become a believer in seatbelts. Not one in a million kids today is going to die when their seatbelt's unbuckled. That's one too many. And the thing is, most of these kids won't become killers, but all the killers played these video games. All the killers had this one common form in common. But what they do become is they become bullies. They become sleep deprived. They become sullen and surly. And we've got to be aware of that. When you detox that kid and you said, look at you, this is the video game doing this. This is not you. Look how you're behaving. And make them self-aware. As a parent, be tuned into that when we detox them. So the first thing is just to overcome that denial, that, maybe it's the husbands. I played those games. I'm okay. It's like seatbelts. It's a risk factor. It's a foolish risk factor. And we outline in the book in 2005, the state of California overwhelmingly voted to regulate children's access to violent video games. The data was that powerful. The home of Hollywood, the home of Silicon Valley, California overwhelmingly voted to regulate children's access to violent video games. Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor. Arnold signed the law. He said, I make violent movies. I protect my children from the movies. I particularly want to protect them from these violent video games. Although back in 2005, the data was that strong. This industry has had a disinformation campaign going on decade after decade, but the data was there. And the video game industry fought all the way to the Supreme Court to sell any game to any kid at any age. And that's in the book. So understand that California knew the data was there. The home of Hollywood, the home of Silicon Valley overwhelmingly voted to regulate children's access. The data is that powerful, and the need to protect our children is that strong. And it lays this foundation. Not every kid that plays a game becomes a killer, but all these mass murderers played the games, and all of them watched some movie 50 times. There's products of this sick culture that we're feeding our children. Maybe your kid will just be sleep deprived. Maybe he'll have a traffic accident. Maybe he'll be suicidal. Maybe your kid will not get the grades they ought to have and be sullen and surly and uncommunicative. But maybe your kid will be a bully. And maybe you can stop that right now by taking these murder simulators where you're rewarded for making people suffer and given condition rewarded for inflicting suffering on others. Take that out of their life and make them a better human being. So the first step then is that take the challenge now.org TV turnoff curriculum. It's a K through 12 curriculum. It's available online right now. A school district, a K through 12 school district, upstate in Michigan, put together a curriculum, did a 10-day detox, and they did controlled double-blind observation of playground and cafeteria behavior. So they had moms who volunteered to be in the cafeteria, be in the playground, and record behavior. Now, they didn't know if this is a group of kids that were doing the turnoff or not. They didn't know. And so they were out on the playground and they were horrified at the play that was taking place. Mothers wanted to intervene. There had been an episode of the Living Dead had been on the night before, and they drug a body and they kicked the body. And so there they were in the playground dragging this kid, and the others are kicking this kid, and the mother says, hey, we need to intervene. We need to stop this. This is bad. So we did this controlled double-blind observation of playground and cafeteria behavior. And the ones who were in the middle of the detox had, and bullying was counted as verbal aggression, actually, and then physical aggression was counted with actual physical contact. And they had some good little rule of thumb dynamics to separate them. But what they were able to demonstrate was the schools, and different schools put it in place at different times. Later, they got really good at detoxing the week before their standardized testing. To detox the kids the week before standardized testing, there's amazing. The kids weren't sleep deprived. The kids weren't being bullied. The fight or flight almost a flush out of their brain. Of course, they're going to do better. And state standardized testing skyrocketed. They also had a juvenile confinement institute, basically juvenile prison, and they did the turnoff there, and were demonstrated the same thing: cut violence in half, cut bullying in half, and raised test scores double digits. So
that's incredible.
The dynamics are there. Yeah, and the curriculum's online.
Yeah, this is incredible. And it's as simple as detox your kid from violent video games, violent movies, the context. And we could talk about it more in depth, but you mentioned as well, the same thing for the girls. It's different for the boys with the video games than for the girls with the social media, but many similar challenges are occurring for these two groups. And just to emphasize what your research is showing, you talk about this in Assassination Generation, the areas where this has been done: playground aggression halves. Aggressive behavior cuts in half. Classroom bad behavior is halved. We see all of these examples where the fruit of not using video games is leading to kids performing better academically, behaving better with peers, with adults, doing better on standardized testing. And so this resource, takethechallengenow.net, we posted a link on social media, takethechallengenow.net. You can check out the program. And what's amazing, Lieutenant Colonel, can you speak a little bit to how it's actually designed for different grades? It's not just a total detox and you just don't use the media, but it's age appropriate. Even, for example, middle schoolers, you talk about how the middle school kids will do research where maybe they object to this detox and they start to research it and have to write a paper and they realize, oh, wow, I'm actually convinced because the data is there. This isn't good for me.
And the curriculum is, again, a K through 12 curriculum. That 1 year will be science focused, and then the next year will be math focused. The next year's history or social studies focused. So it's different every year. And some brilliant educators put it together. It's been available online for well over a decade now. It's just sitting there chugging away and providing resources on this turnoff dynamic. It's just a bunch of brilliant educators put it together and made it available and demonstrate what can be done. It's so hard to sustain it without the support of the parents. Mm-hmm. And that's where your show comes in. That's where Melanie Hemp's, screenstrong.com comes in to come at this from different directions. But the first foundation is that the parents have to realize the problem and then to detox a kid and watch this behavior roller coaster. I don't like who I am when I play those games. Keep those games away from me. After a couple of rides on that roller coaster, you can really begin to work together on this with our grandchildren. We'd say, look, this is the video game doing this. All we did was ask you to turn off the game for a few minutes and look how you're acting. This is not you. This is not normal. This is the games doing this to you. And there's a better person inside there. We want that person there. We want to be able to work with that. So this there's so many attendant pathologies again coming with it. The sleep deprivation dynamic that's so toxic just goes away when they no longer have the fight or flight hormones flooding through them, the addictive response, when they play until the streetlights come on and then they come in. When the school district in upstate Michigan was putting it in place, they did a lot of activities in the school in the evening. They had a school district in Wyoming that put it in place, and it was K through 12 school, detox for 10 days. It was in like January, which is when their test week was taking place, and the student government asked to do it again the next year in the spring when the weather was good, so that they could do more outdoor activity. They wanted to do it again. That. They wanted to do it in the spring. They wanted the outdoor activities. So, kids don't know how to play games outside. They don't know how to play hide and seek. They don't know how to play freeze tag. They don't know how to play, Red Rover. These games that have been lost. I used to tell my audiences, ollie income free. All ye income free. When's the last time we talked like that? 200 years ago. That's ollie income free has been passed from child to child, generation after generation, and now it's dead. It's lost. A generation of children that have never played hide and seek. They don't know how to. So the schools were teaching them, and the teachers had little. One teacher was a rock collector. Another teacher was, was into archery, and they would do they'd have little things in the evenings, and the children got to know the teachers as people, as human beings who had hobbies and who taught and talked to them about what their delights were and their hobbies were. We've always dreamed of some Christian school just picking up and running with this, some homeschool program just grabbing it and running with it. It's sitting there online. It's been used again at different school districts at different times, and it goes in place. It does well, but it's so hard to sustain it because the parents aren't aware of what's being achieved and what we're doing and to sustain it. That's why I love Melanie Hempy's program with screenstrong.com. In conjunction with this, she's focused on the families and the health issues and the addictive dynamics. and you tie it into this TV turn-off curriculum, and something very powerful can be done.
And I love too when you look at Melanie Hempy's work, it helps you to understand, okay, we have been led to believe that the idea that, well, if my kid's playing video games, they're at least safe and inside and I don't have to worry about watching them. But it's quite the opposite. It's leading to the aggressive behavior. It's leading to the apathy in life, the surliness, the suicidality, all of what you mentioned. But also, we've lost that generational attitude. I used to be outside and playing and roaming around and hiking out in the forest for hours at a time and then come back home. And there was that level of responsibility and trust and knowledge of strangers and how to handle myself in a way that we've lost today, Lieutenant Colonel.
Yeah. And again, no child has ever said, I cursed my parents for the TV I couldn't watch. We've got a section in the book there when, kids talked about how their dad on the first day of summer cut the power cord. Just cut the cord for the television and kicked him out the door on the first day of summer and said, don't come back till the streetlights come on, and how blessed they were. And what a beautiful thing we've given them. There's another book that's a real favorite of ours, the Read Aloud book. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful book. It begins with a poem about how blessed I was to have a mother who read to me. And this book we recommend as part of the curriculum. It's the author is Tim Trelease, and it's the Read Aloud book. It's a 1 million copy bestseller. It just is this beautiful. And, when we turn off TV, think of the things that we're turning on, and the beautiful in this. So here's a poem by Strickland Gillian, The Reading Mother. It says, you may have tangible wealth untold, caskets of jewels and coffers of gold. Richer than I, you can never be. I had a mother who read to me. And that's the opening of this book, the Read Aloud book. I read to my 3 sons and now my grandchildren. My oldest grandson's in the military and engaged, or maybe a great grandfather in the blink of an eye. And one of the things we try to do is read to them every night and own that time. When we turn off the TV, what do we turn on? The written word, the books, the richness, and it begins with instead of watching TV and then kicking them off to bed when the hormones are pumping through their body. You hold them close and you read to them for that last half hour. And what a blessing you give to them for parents to own that last half hour. All other things being equal, what you do in the last half hour is what you dream about. And what you dream about appears to be what we process into long-term memory. So as a parent, your child could have a terrible day. If you own that last half hour, bring them in close, read to them. We read through all the Narnia books a chapter at a time and all the Oz books and other books. Right up until my kids were, middle teenage years, I was still reading to them for a half an hour every night. And a lot of things went wrong. I was military. I was gone so much. But I worked late hours, but I owned that last half hour, and we limited their media. And our grandson, when he was born, we cut a deal with the kids that they would keep him media free. And we would donate to his college fund. Well, he just tapped into that college fund now 2 years ago, got 2 years of college and then enlisted. But he went to a daycare, and they had a TV hour at daycare. And his parents said, our grandson's parents said, well, we want to keep him media free. So they put him in a high chair looking out the window with crayons while everybody else was watching TV. He was happy as a little clam, sitting in a high chair, looking out the window at the world go by with his little crayons. And he was just happy little clam.
That's fantastic.
And what a reader, what an amazing reader he is now, how he grew up just embracing books and reading and doing so well in school. And, what a blessing we gave him by encouraging that with our children. And now, hopefully as a father, he'll be even more inclined to support that same behavior with his children and in their future, our great grandchildren, that next generation. So
I love
as
that
parents,
example.
we got so much that we can do to enrich their youth. Let them be children while they're children. Let them have a childhood. A video game, a cell phone, that is not a childhood. Watching TV all the time, that's not childhood. Let them have a childhood. and they will bless you as adults for this
Amen.
opportunity to have truly had a childhood.
Yes. And you bring up, reading. I remember my mom read to us every day growing up as kids into, I think that those middle school years, and I still heard it. She was reading to my younger siblings, and great books, so many books, not just, the hardback books when the kids are 1 or 2 that everyone does, but as the years go on. I love you saying that, own that half hour. We did have a question come in. If we could briefly take it in the few moments we have. A question comes in from Patrick. What do you do if you do live in a dangerous neighborhood and it's not safe to be outside, such as in a gang-infested area? Many parents are choosing video games in this instance as a solution. What do you do then?
Well, again, a lot of us have the idea of a staycation. We have a vacation, but we stay at home. Our children can have an beautiful enriched life at home if you need to. It's not about watching TV. It's about making a tent out of a blanket and two chairs and camping out, in the living room. It's just a tiny bit of imagination, and we can push that envelope. The board games that the kids can play, the reading that they can do, that if we encourage that behavior, it might mean getting on a bus or getting on a car and going to another part of town to a nice park. Recent research talked about how much pleasure people got from parks. The pleasure was on par with Christmas. The only thing that compared with the joy people had from being in a park was the joy from Christmas. In this major academic study, it was a brilliant piece of research looking at keywords on Twitter and what was associated with great joy. So, get in a car, get in a bus, go to the other part of town. If you have to, find a park. We've got a little town here with a wonderful, wonderful playground, and we stopped at a little store 30 miles away. The mom said, our kids, every time we go through your town in Mascouda, we stop in your little playground, and our kids love to play there for a half an hour every time we go through.
Very
so
sweet.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Know that you're in
Imagination,
control.
tents, puzzles.
Yes.
All these things inside that can be done. We just need to have those resources available. I think about the childhood memories so many of us have with the tents, the puzzles, the board games, even if it's indoors, because that's what's required for a safe area. Bring those things back. The video games are not the solution. Please check out Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He's been here with us. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel. Your book, Assassination Generation, we post a link on social media as well as in the podcast notes and to screenstrong.com and takethechallengenow.net as real solutions.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Really neat news that came out today. Maybe you do, maybe you don't follow beauty pageants. I personally do not. However, the news hit today, breaking news that for the first time ever, moms and wives will be able to compete for Miss Universe. This comes after severe controversy surrounding a title being removed from former Miss Ukraine 3 years ago because she was a mother. Literally lost her crown because she was a mother. Anyways, I think that it is an interesting shift. I hope it's something we see more of, where there's not a culture that we live in where women are punished for being mothers or punished for being wives as if they don't have their priorities straight because their focus is split. They should be split. You should have a split focus if you are a spouse, if you are a mother, if you are a parent, especially for mothers. I think in this culture, it's been fascinating to see, especially over the last week and the Front for Life, how various states pass pro-life laws and various states pass pro-abortion laws. I want to talk about this more later this week, both the Miss Universe contest allowing wives and mothers to compete, but also this whole idea that it's businesses right now, businesses, not just the pro-abortion movement, but businesses who are viscerally fighting in favor of pro-abortion laws. Why? Because as they released in a major letter a few years ago, having a lack of access to abortion is bad for business. That's right. Companies find it has to do with the bottom line, and we have to change that cultural tide by being pro-mother, pro-wife, pro-family, and understanding and supporting these ideas. And I think that the announcement of the Miss Universe contest, allowing wives and mothers to compete, again, you may not follow, these beauty contests either, but it does speak volumes to the importance of allowing such a thing to occur in the 21st century. You're listening to Trending with Timmery here on Relevant Radio. While we're speaking of women, I do want to speak of St. Edith Stein, also known as St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. This is a saint who has chased me down for years. Perhaps you've had a saint where they just keep coming onto your radar, you know next to nothing about them. And I remember about 10 years ago, finally, after hearing the name over and over again, I started to look into the writings of St. Edith Stein, and she has so many writings to unpack. She was a Carmelite nun and died eventually as a religious sister. She died during World War II in Auschwitz, along with her sister, her biological sister. But her story is phenomenal. She goes from being a Jew and growing up as a Jew and with that culture and religion to becoming agnostic to one day eventually becoming Catholic and a Catholic religious sister. She never had biological children, but she speaks profoundly to the role of women as mothers and how fundamental that is to us as human beings, as human females. And a few of my favorite quotes from her that if you're a regular listener here on Trending, you've heard me share, and I'd like to unpack more of her writings as well today. But she said one thing, and I hope that all of us take this to heart when we ponder the differences between men and women, whether someone has a child or does not have a child. She once said, "A woman's soul is fashioned as a shelter in which other souls may unfold." A woman's soul is fashioned as a shelter in which other souls may unfold. I think this very statement cuts to the very heart of what it means to be a woman, whether you have children biologically or not. St. Edith Stein did not have children biologically, but she understood on a very profound level, from basic human experience, from phenomenology, from the very beginning and dawn of human nature, the story of our human anthropology starting in Genesis, that a primary part of what it meant to be a woman was tied up to this capacity, this potential to have children. And this biological reality reveals something about the spiritual reality of who we are. St. Edith Stein and Pope St. John Paul II, before he was Pope, were writing and living at the same time in human history, when the crisis of humanity, when humanity was being destroyed and so intensely attacked and utterly destroyed, I mean literally through war. They were there right on the dawn of a time in the world where we would question if there even is a difference between a man and a woman. If a man can have a baby. No, a man can't have a baby, yet we still seem to be getting these headlines that men are pregnant. It's impossible. But here's the reality. St. Edith Stein, just before this crisis, was writing to the crisis that we would experience. And she says, "A woman's soul is fashioned as a shelter in which other souls may unfold," speaking to the potency that a woman has biologically, but also spiritually, to nourish, grow, protect, and advance other human beings, not just those who are biologically entrusted to their care from womb to nursing to development, but even those who come onto our radar as women. St. Edith Stein also said that a fundamental part of women naturally seeks to embrace that which is living, personal, and whole. And she says to cherish, guard, protect, nourish, and advance growth is the natural maternal yearning of all women. Do you hear that? To cherish, guard, protect, nourish, and advance growth is that natural part of the maternal yearning that all women have. St. Edith Stein, when she talks about, at the dawn of, as we see this industrial revolution, as we see many women who were in the workforce during World War II, because we saw many women entered into the workforce during World War II as men were away working. And so women were helping to keep the country running. And one thing that we see in St. Edith Stein's work is she talks about that place of women in the workforce and a very special gift that a woman has inside the workforce, inside the home, in the heart of human society. is that the woman prevents the rest of human beings from atrophying, from whether it be workaholism for a man, whether it be the distraughtness that children can experience, even the crisis of, as we were talking about, video games and social media, and how this is leading truly to an atrophy among children with aggression, suicidality, surliness, misbehavior, all of these things that are happening. That at the heart of society is the role of women in that gift we have, that potential we have for motherhood. Again, not strictly restricted to those who biologically carry and raise physiological children, but those who, all of us as women, have this capacity, as she says, our very souls are fashioned as a shelter in which other souls may unfold. St. Edith Stein's writings are so poignant and so relevant today in the 21st century in this crisis of femininity and masculinity. And they're relevant for us to dive into and unpack. I was just speaking to a woman earlier today who has come back into the church, praise the Lord, is having an IUD removed from her body after years of hormonal contraception, all of these things. And we were talking about, her rediscovering this love for life, the gift from motherhood. And I said, read the writings of St. Edith Stein. Read her essays on women that will help you to better understand the very theology and orientation of who we are as women. St. Edith Stein, pray for us. This is Timmery from Trending with Timmery. Wednesday is our weekly Gentleman's Hour, and I'm taking your questions you'd otherwise ask your mom, your sister, and you want a Catholic take on. I'm here. We talk about everything from sports, nutrition, how important fitness is in our lives, but also navigating the day-to-day, dating, relationships, marriage, all of that. So gentlemen, join me for my weekly Gentleman's Hour, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.